Well, hello again, sports fans. I recently lost my Cyclops Tornado GPS module when I crashed the Ranger a couple of weeks ago. I've since replaced it with a later generation unit that was recommended by a guy on the Cyclops Tornado forum. They're about $20 US from Bangood, and the specs suggest that they can be programmed to fit within the range used by the Tornado. So these are the main settings that needed to be programmed in, and I used the U-Centre evaluation software, which can be downloaded for free from the U-Centre website. So the Tornado seemed to be happy talking to the GPS unit, and the OSD showed that it was getting a good signal and it was changing modes properly, so I was quite hopeful when I threw it up in the air. So the plan was to climb to a safe altitude and then switch through the various flight modes to make sure they're all working correctly. So here I've switched into loiter, which is programmed to do a right hand circle of 100 metres radius, and it seems to be doing that until it suddenly decides it's going to go left a little bit, and then it comes back to the right. I'm a bit bemused because I'm getting a good strong GPS signal, as you can see up in the right hand corner. It doesn't take long for it to take another quick turn to the left in the middle of the circle, and it continues to exhibit this behaviour for the half a dozen circuits that I left it in this mode for before deciding to call this test a failure. So I decided to test out the pilot assist mode, which is essentially heading and altitude hold. There's a light wind coming from the right, which doesn't account for the amount of banking and turning that seems to be happening in PA mode, so it seems to be exhibiting similar misbehaviour to the loiter mode. So I then switch it into autopilot mode to fly between a couple of waypoints, and as you can see, it's just banking right and left. It seems to be heading in the general direction of the waypoint coordinates, but it's certainly not taking a direct route there, so once again I'm calling this a failure. So finally I take it out a bit and flick the return to home switch to see how that's performing. And as you can see, it turns around straight away in the general direction of home, but continues to roll backwards and forwards on the way. I figured I must have somehow messed up the configuration of the new GPS module, so when I got home I hooked it back up to the U-Centre software. Even though I was inside, it didn't take very long for the GPS to lock onto enough satellites to get a fix. But as this display shows, some of those locks were quite intermittent and dropping in and out. I decided to check the output rate and then thought, well, I'll try dropping it down to 5 Hz to see if that improves things, and it did. The intermittent satellites seemed to lock in quite solidly. So then I just went through the other configuration screens that I'd set up to make sure that they were still holding the settings that I'd put in, and everything seemed to be okay. So I uploaded the settings to the GPS and looked forward to the next day's flying. So today's plan was the same: launch, climb to a safe altitude, and then go through and test all of the Tornado autopilot functions. So I climb up to about 100 metres and slip it into PA mode, and I'm pretty happy to see that it seems to be holding its heading and altitude without the rolling I was seeing the day before. There's still a little bit of wind coming from the right, but it's not having a great deal of effect. I do notice though that the signal strength indicator for the satellite's only showing 3 out of 5 bars and is fluctuating up and down, so I'm a little bit curious about why that's happening. So next I slip it into return to home mode, and she turns for home, heads pretty well straight there without any sign of the rolling that I was seeing the day before, and when it arrives it goes into a nice circle within the 100 metres that I've set for it. I do notice that the satellite signal strength indicator is jumping up and down and is dropping down quite low at times though. And it really starts to become noticeable after I slip it into loiter mode. As you can see here, the GPS coordinates are intermittently dropping out completely, and when they do, the Tornado switches itself from loiter mode into PA mode and back again when the signal comes back, and this is having an effect on the path that's being taken during loiter. When I switched into autopilot mode to test the path between waypoints, the same thing was happening. So after I landed, I checked out the GPS and everything seemed to be okay. The wiring was fine, the antenna wasn't sitting near any electrical components. I just couldn't figure out, so once again took it home and put it back on the uCenter software to check it out. Given that I was inside, I wasn't expecting to see a lot of satellites, but what I did see were locked in and nice and solid. I decided to see what effect enabling the GLONASS satellite detection might have. It didn't take very long for it to start detecting a lot more satellites, but as you can see in this display, they were quite intermittent in nature. I really don't know much about this GPS stuff, but I decided to see if there was another parameter I could modify to somehow improve that, and I settled on the protocol page. After a bit of experimentation, I found that changing the GSV talker ID, whatever that is, from 1 to 0 seemed to settle everything down. And the longer I left it hooked up, the more satellites it seemed to pull in. So I'll just fast forwarded through the next couple of minutes where I just left it sitting there on its own. So everything looks okay, so I decided I'd save these settings to the GPS module and head out the next day and try once more. So it's another glorious winter's day, and the plan for today is the same. Get some altitude and start testing out the various flight controller modes. Once again, there's probably about a 5 to 10 knot wind coming from the right or straight ahead as I'm going at the moment. So I'm in PA mode. The signal strength has gone back up to 5 bars and is holding there solidly, and PA is performing absolutely perfectly. I switch it into autopilot and again everything looks okay. I've changed the waypoints from the previous couple of tests just to put me out in the open a bit more. But once again the satellite signal strength is holding at the maximum 5 bars. The range is maintaining a straight and level course apart from a few bumps it's getting from the wind. So I'm pretty happy at this point. She seems to turn a little early for the second waypoint, but I can't think of any reason why it's done that. But it's a nice smooth turn and it settles on the new course quite quickly and flies directly towards it without too much rolling at all, other than what you'd expect from the wind. So yes, it's looking good. I let it fly a couple of full circuits of the 4 waypoint pattern and there are no issues whatsoever. Then I switch it into return to home mode. Once again she turns straight for home, heads there with a minimum of rolling, just some little bumps from the wind, and when she arrives there she starts circling within the 100 metre circle that I expected to see. So again, no problems in this mode either. So I'm pretty happy that everything's working okay and decide I'll do a bit of an endurance test to see if I can pick up why I lost the Ranger on its last flight, to see if it's a time thing or a battery thing. and I'd slip it into loiter mode and decide to just leave it there until the battery starts to wind down. I'm running a 5200 milliamp hour battery, and I figure I can probably pull 4000 milliamp hours out of it without doing any damage. So I watched the Ranger for a couple of circuits, and it seems to be absolutely locked in the same circle. I can't see any change in course or direction at all. So I go and make myself a cup of tea and just sit down and watch it for about 15 minutes, I think, before I get down near the 4000 milliamp hour consumption. Unfortunately, I was so focused on monitoring the battery consumption, I wasn't paying enough attention to the battery voltage. So by the time I decided to land, it dropped down below the 10 volts, which is the setting for automatic return to home. So that's what the Tornado tried to do in the middle of my landing approach. I panicked a bit, thinking I was just about out of gas, and madly tried to get back to the strip before she hit the deck. But just in time, I had enough presence of mind to put it into manual mode, which allowed me a lot more control, so I was able to get it down relatively safely. So, all's well that ends well. I'm not sure why the configuration changes I made worked, but they did, and I seem to be happy with them for the moment.